So I thought, okay, this is not my path. What is my path? And I thought, oh, you know, I'm still interested in medicine. But I'm interested in the medicine that worked for me, not the medicine that I didn't feel I was getting benefit from. And I looked at some naturopathic colleges out there because naturopathy is much more, it's much bigger in the West Coast. So I looked at the National College of Naturopathic Medicine and Bastyr. And when I went to these programs, the one thing that stood out to me was the Chinese medicine. And I kept thinking, well, if that's really what I want to do, why go to anything, why learn the supplements, why learn these other things, these other techniques, if that's not really what I want to do. What I want to do is the Chinese medicine. So I said, okay, I'm going to go get a master's degree in acupuncture. My wife decided she wanted to get a PhD, so we looked for a place where we could both do those things, and we ended up in Boston. And I ended up at the oldest acupuncture school in the country called the New England School of Acupuncture. And I just want to describe a little bit about acupuncturists. So I'm sure if you know anything about acupuncturists, you'll often see LAC by their names. And what that means is they're licensed in the state to practice acupuncture. It's not an indication of their training. Most acupuncturists have something called an MAC, which is a Masters of Acupuncture. And Masters of Acupuncture means that they have learned acupuncture practice. And some people like myself have an MAOM, which means that we learn acupuncture practice as well as Chinese herbal medicine. And that's 1,000 more hours than acupuncture alone. And in my school, we had 2 tracks. We had the Japanese acupuncture track, and we had the Chinese herbal medicine track. And then there were a couple people who were crazy like myself who said, okay, I'm going to do both of them. And what's great about the Japanese acupuncture, I don't know how many people have experienced acupuncture. If you have, it's probably, in this area, finding a Japanese style practitioner is pretty rare. But Japanese style is all about the practitioner being able to feel energy and manipulate energy. So when you learn Japanese style acupuncture, you really learn energy, and you learn it as something real as opposed to something theoretical. What's great about the herbal medicine track is that you really learn theory, that you learn a lot about how to differentiate cases and how to break them down. And so one of the great benefits of having done both of those tracks is that I could actually believe in energy as being something real and manipulatable. And also I could apply it in theory in ways that are kind of a little deeper. So now's time for a little history lesson. So acupuncture, and I'm going to use acupuncture for all of Chinese medicine, but acupuncture was so successful. It went from China into every country of Asia. It became the primary medicine. Even these countries that already had a medicine took Chinese medicine and basically integrated it with themselves, with their own. So for instance, in Japan there was a whole moxibustion method of healing, which is using an herb that you burn, a special herb called Artemisia mugwort, which is tends to be what we call a weed here in this country. There it's cultivated and used as a special thing. And they took that in Chinese medicine and it basically merged them. And now everybody who practices acupuncture learns moxibustion therapy because it's such a fantastic addition to the medicine. So acupuncture and Chinese medicine became the primary medicine in a landmass far greater than this country. For thousands of years, used on a daily basis. It was used to treat and it still is to treat every possible complaint you can have. I mean, there was no Western medicine. If you had an infection, you're using Chinese medicine. If you had gout, you're using Chinese medicine. Whatever it might be, you're using Chinese medicine. It was the only option. And you know, I always like to say to people, how often do you do something that didn't work the first time, a second or third or fourth or fifth time? So, you know, a lot of physicians, when I talk to them, they tell me, you know, acupuncture is not scientifically rigorously studied. And I'm thinking, how do you ignore thousands of years of, you know, continuous use? It's harder to just, you know. It drives me crazy when I hear that, but you know, it's true. There's probably a little less in terms of scientific rigor because it's a very subjective medicine. But if you go to the NIH website, they have a whole department now that's doing all kinds of studies about acupuncture theory. In fact, it's the most studied alternative medicine out there. And I could go off on a tangent about how studies are conducted, but they do see that acupuncture is significant in its effectiveness for, all kinds of conditions. So, in every country, Western medicine came in, eventually. And when Western medicine came in, it was fantastic for these countries. And they said, wow, we can cure an infection in a day. This is amazing. And so every country where Western medicine eventually came, they said, we're going to make this our primary medicine now. And so what they did is they repressed Chinese medicine at that point. And they said, you can't practice this because we're westernizing. And what's interesting is that every country that did that eventually said, oops, we're going to bring the Chinese medicine back in. Because what's interesting, the way I would differentiate Western and Eastern medicine is that Western medicine, I call it a unit medicine, which is to say, you want to find out the specific unit that's diseased. You want to figure out the molecule, the gene, the pathway. If you know that, you can create the specific unit that will cure this problem. So if I know what molecule is causing hypertension, I'm going to give you the medicine that will cure that. The problem is, what if you don't know the right unit? What if there are multiple units? What if units are working together in some fantastical way to cause a problem? Western medicine doesn't know how to address these things yet. What's fantastic about Eastern medicine, by that I also want to include Ayurvedic medicine and other kinds of medicines, is that it's what I call system medicine, which is to say, you don't need to know the specific unit that's diseased. You want to know what system that unit falls into. And you treat the system, and all the little units within it are going to change. So that is why Western medicine doesn't have a great treatment for allergies. Because we know mast cells are part of the problem, histamine is part of the problem. But, you could take antihistamines till, I don't know, till pigs fly. Pigs, you know what it is. Blue in the face, thank you. I'm not so good with idiots. It's not gonna cure the problem. You could go to Chinese medicine, and my personal experience was it can cure the problem. I haven't had allergies, except it took me years later to figure out the cat and the mold part of it, but I haven't had allergies. I kept an inhaler in my pocket for years without using it, because I needed that crutch to know that if I ever had an attack. But I haven't, since those first 7 treatments, I have not had a asthma attack. So, so system theory is amazing. So Chairman Mao comes to power in China. And just like every other country, he says, we're westernizing. And so he says, we're not going to have this Chinese medicine anymore. And the problem is, he's got billions of people. And it just slowly dawns on him that he cannot train Western-style practitioners fast enough to deal with these billions of people. So what he ends up doing is he says, okay, we're going to bring Chinese medicine back, but we're going to modernize it. And what he did is he created something that's called traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. The problem is it's a misnomer. There's nothing traditional about it. And the metaphor that was told to me years ago is that you learn the peaks of Chinese medicine, the peaks of the mountains, but you don't learn that there are any valleys. And so we would get all this theory, and I want to back up and say, every acupuncture school that teaches Chinese acupuncture, which is pretty much all of them, teaches TCM in America. TCM is what they taught the barefoot doctors, which is, barefoot doctors are a class of practitioner that was uneducated in China, and they taught them these skills, and then they said, go out into your community. And they could do quite a bit of good, but there's a certain point where, with lacking more training, they kind of hit the wall. So I learned these 2 branches, the Japanese style, I learned the Chinese style, and I feel like there's something missing here. We would learn these pieces of theory together, and these pieces of theory were all were taken as simultaneous truths, but they weren't ever connected in any way. And we were just supposed to just kind of accept that. And I have kind of a hunger for knowledge, and I felt like this is not good enough for me. And I was fortunate enough to win a fellowship to study the classics of Chinese medicine after I graduated from my program. And the classics, the Neijing and the Nanjing, are the oldest surviving texts. The Neijing is divided into two books. One's called the Suwen and the other's the Lingshu. The Lingshu is translated as the spiritual pivot. And the reason why I'm saying this to you is to give you an immediate sense that we're talking about something very different. We're talking about spirit, which is a totally different way of looking at the world than talking about medicine. The Suwen is much more specific about like dealing with problems. The Lingshu is taking it to another level. And what it all comes down to are these bagwas, what I told you in the very beginning. Because Chinese medicine, when you get down to the heart of it, you get down to classical theory, is an energy medicine. It's not even a medicine if you look at it closely. It's really, it's more of a traditional physics applied to the body. And so I'm going to get into that a little bit now. That year I basically took that fellowship, and from that fellowship I wrote a couple of books, The Secret Chamber, which is hard to see here, and The Indispensable Book of Secrets, which is my way of educating other acupuncturists about this theory that, so most people when they read the Lingshu and Suwen, it's like reading a grocery list. It is not, it's not like a Dan Brown novel. It is very hard to get through and muddle through. And most people, they don't really read it, and they certainly don't read it multiple times. And you know, I had the luxury of reading it over and over and over and over again, and then reading it over and over again multiple years, and just seeing how these pieces of theory started to come together. So I started to teach continuing education about classical acupuncture to other acupuncturists around the country. And I was invited to teach a class at a conference about traditional physics. And I said, great, that'd be fantastic. Except, what is traditional physics? Because at that point I didn't know about these bagwas. And so I studied up about that. And I really struggled with the fact that there were two bagwas. How could there possibly be two representations of energy in space? How can traditional physics survive if you have Newtonian physics and Einsteinian, not Einstein, but what's the modern theory of? All right, sorry. Oh, yeah. What's that? Well, it's macro versus micro in physics here. But so I had this opportunity. What's that? Quantum. Thank you. I just couldn't come up with it. So essentially, I was in the airport. I was going to this conference, and I still did not know what I was going to say. I was sweating bullets here, and I suddenly had this revelation. It had to do with something. So I'm going to go back. I told you about qi. Yin and yang is basically when you take qi, how it behaves. It can behave. Yin is where it's cold and dark and condensing. Yang is where it's active and vibrant and hot. And so we're talking about a spectrum between hot and cold here when we talk about yin and yang. The next level of theory is something called heaven, man, and earth. And this piece of theory is pretty much ignored by most acupuncture schools. And so they're kind of skipping, go straight to the fourth division, which is the four directions, north, east, south, west, and how energy is going to move in these directions very specific ways. And then you get to the 5 elements, which is basically when you take qi, qi is like a wheel. And as you turn it, it has specific places it will stop. And when you stop it there, it will behave in a very specific way. And so we have these metaphorical names for how it behaves in these different stopping places. They're called phases. Fire, it will flow. It will push things. It will be active and hot. Earth, it will accumulate. It will stagnate. Metal, it will rise to a peak. Water, it will fall over and sink. And wood, it will stretch out and buzz. And so, essentially, I'm at the airport and I suddenly realize that these two bagwas were representing were differences in heaven, man, and earth. One was talking about this plane of energy coming from outer space to our planet. The other one was talking about energy, like King Wen was in his cell, he was feeling energy, and all the different walls is about energy around us.